All right, welcome. For the next few minutes, we're going to dive into a world you can't see, but one that affects every single one of your patients. Think of this as your personal field guide to the microscopic agents of disease. So let's just start with this question right here. As a nurse, you are on the absolute front lines of health. But every single day, there's this invisible battle going on, a war at the microscopic level that really determines a patient's outcome. And honestly, understanding that world is your single greatest weapon. And that world, well, that's the world of medical microbiology. You can think of it as your intelligence gathering operation. It's all about studying these tiny microorganisms to figure out how they work and what role they play in keeping people healthy or making them sick. You've got to know your enemy to protect your patient. Okay, but let's get real. Why does this actually matter to you, day to day, on the floor? Well, because knowing exactly what tiny organism is causing an infection changes everything. It means you can help get to an accurate diagnosis faster, make sure the treatment is actually going to work, tighten up your infection control, and even explain things more clearly to your patient. It's absolutely fundamental. So, here's our game plan. We'll start by taking a look at the battlefield. Then we'll meet the 5 main troublemakers. After that, we'll break them down into a couple of key groups before we put it all together for a final test. Ready? Let's jump right in. You have to think of every infection as a battle. And to win that battle, you have to know who the players are. They are not all the same, not even close. They have different builds, different strategies, and most importantly, different weaknesses we can exploit.
Okay, so now it's time to meet the 5 major classes of microorganisms you're going to see over and over again. These are the usual suspects that get rounded up every time there's an infectious disease investigation.
Here's our lineup: bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, and helminths. And these guys really run the gamut, from incredibly simple little things to surprisingly complex creatures. This list right here, this is the foundation for everything else we're about to cover. We're going to kick things off with the 2 you probably hear about the most, bacteria and viruses. Now, people sometimes lump them together, but on a biological level, they are worlds apart. One is a simple, self-sufficient life form, and the other is basically a biological pirate. First up, bacteria. These are single-celled organisms, and the best way to think about their internal structure is to imagine a tiny one-room studio apartment. Everything's just kind of floating around in one big space. That's because they're prokaryotes, which is just a fancy way of saying they don't have a true nucleus to keep their DNA all neat and tidy. Now, these vital stats are super important. So yes, they are definitely cells, but they're prokaryotic. Their DNA just hangs out in the cytoplasm. See those 70 S ribosomes? Those are its little protein-making factories. And that S just refers to their size, which is smaller than the ribosomes in our own cells. And this last one, a rigid wall with peptidoglycan, that is the key. That specific material is the bullseye that antibiotics like penicillin are designed to hit. And don't ever let their simplicity fool you. Take a look at this number. That's nearly 1,150 people. That's the predicted number of deaths from just one type of bacterial infection in one country over a single year. So yeah, these simple organisms are a very, very big deal. Okay, now for something completely different, viruses. I want you to basically forget everything we just said about cells, because viruses aren't really cells at all. Think of them more like tiny little biological robots. They're just a bit of genetic code, either DNA or RNA, never both, stuffed inside a protein shell. And you can see that difference right away in their stats. Are they cells? Nope. Do they have ribosomes to make their own proteins? Nope. They are completely helpless on their own. They can't reproduce. To do anything, they have to invade a living cell, like one of ours, and hijack its internal machinery to make more copies of themselves. They are the ultimate biological hijackers. So let's put them head to head, because this is probably the single most important distinction in all of microbiology. Bacteria are living cells that can grow and reproduce all by themselves. Viruses are just particles that are dead in the water until they can hijack a host. And here is the critical takeaway. Antibiotics work by targeting bacterial machinery. Since viruses don't have any of that machinery, antibiotics have absolutely zero effect on them. Okay, so we've met the simple cell and the hijacker. Let's move on to the rest of our agents, what I like to call the eukaryotic crew. This group includes fungi, protozoa, and helminths. And the key word here is eukaryotic. It just means their cells are a lot more complex and, in a lot of ways, much more like our own. First up in the eukaryotic club, we've got the fungi. You know them as yeasts and molds. Now, they are eukaryotes, so they have a proper nucleus and larger ADS ribosomes, just like our own cells do. That similarity can sometimes make them tricky to treat. But their unique calling card is a rigid cell wall made of something called chitin. And get this, that's the same tough material that makes up an insect's exoskeleton. Next up, we have the protozoa. These are also single-celled eukaryotes, and you can almost think of them as tiny, free-living animals. Like our cells, they have a true nucleus and just a flexible membrane on the outside, no wall. But what really sets them apart is that most of them can move. They've got little tails or hairs that let them swim around, which is how pathogens like Giardia cause so much trouble. And finally, we get to the giants of this world, the helminths, or worms. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. Why are we talking about worms, which you can often see with the naked eye, in microbiology? Well, it's because while the adults are big, their diagnosis depends on finding their microscopic eggs or larvae in patient samples. They are for sure the most complex agents we deal with. Okay, so we have officially met all 5 of our suspects. Now it's time to put them all in a lineup, compare their features, and really nail down how to tell them apart when you're in the field. This is where it all comes together. First off, just look at the difference in size. This chart says it all, doesn't it? A virus is just a tiny, tiny speck compared to a bacterium, and a yeast cell, which is a type of fungus, absolutely dwarfs them both. Right away, size alone can give you a massive clue about what you're dealing with. And here it is. This is the master cheat sheet. This table is your key to identifying any infectious agent. And you can see a clear pattern, right? We start with viruses, which aren't even cells. Then we move to bacteria, which are simple prokaryotic cells. And then we have the rest of the crew, fungi, protozoa, and helminths, which are all complex eukaryotic cells, but each one has its own telltale feature, like that chitin wall on fungi. Okay, you knew it was coming. It's pop quiz time. Let's put this into practice. Imagine you're in the lab. You've got an unknown organism. It measures about 3 micrometers. You can see it has a true nucleus, and you determine it has a rigid cell wall that contains chitin. So what is it? If you said fungus, you are absolutely right. Great job. So how do we know? Well, the true nucleus means it has to be a eukaryote, so that rules out bacteria. And the fact that it's a cell at all rules out a virus. But that rigid wall made of chitin, that's the dead giveaway. That screams fungus. So we'll leave you with this thought. You now have the basic intel to tell the major players apart. So how does that change things for you? The next time you have a patient with a fever? Or the next time you're going through the motions of an infection control procedure? Does knowing the fundamental difference between a bacterium and a virus change how you think about what you're doing and why it's so important? Because it should. That right there is the power of microbiology.